This is the story of the GTHALL threat. Story written by Novel AI. Narration also by Novel AI. Art and visuals by Night Cafe. Voice acting and video production by Icebane Gaming. This is the story of young Jacob Henderson, an archaeologist who was about to discover something very frightening. His story starts as he is approaching the Manderbrook Estate's mansion via a horse-drawn carriage in search of a cursed book he had heard rumors about at the university. The rain violently thrummed on the roof of his carriage. As he approached the mansion, he saw a strange man standing on the edge of the road, looking down into a small ravine below him. The stranger wore black clothing and held a lantern up high.
Hello there, sir. I'm on my way to Lord Manderbrook's mansion. Are you in need of a lift? No thanks. I have business with Lord Manderbrook. Ah, well, then good luck,
said Jacob as he continued his approach to the gate. He noticed that the gates were open for him, so he dismounted his horse and walked through them. As he entered, two guards ran over to meet him.
Yes, sir. Welcome to the estate.
They both bowed to him.
Thank you,
he said politely to them. As he passed by them, they both looked at each other and whispered.
That's not what we thought we would be greeting today.
He followed the path until it opened up into a large courtyard filled with fountains and beautiful gardens. He gazed around, taking in all the beauty. Suddenly, a woman appeared from behind a tree and spoke to him. It was the daughter of Lord Manderbrook, Stella Manderbrook. She wore a flowing dress that seemed impossibly black and had jewelry that seemed to itch at Jacob's mind, but he tried to ignore it and ask her about the book he was searching for.
Excuse me, miss.
She turned to look at him, and Jacob felt a sense of familiarity coming off her like waves from the sea. As she watched him, Jacob could feel his heart beating faster and began to sweat profusely. He felt faint, but tried his hardest to ignore it, and stammered out the rest of his question.
Is there any chance you might know where the book might be?
She smiled at him coyly and said,
Yes, actually, there is. You should go down to the library and speak to Professor Ivers. There's a book about the occult in his personal collection.
Thank you,
said Jacob as he headed towards the library. As he left the garden, he noticed some strange hieroglyphs carved into the bases of the statues and fountains. He wanted to stop and record them, but his subconscious mind was begging him to leave Stella and the garden. He ignored the warning and continued heading towards the library. As he entered the library, he noticed several books lying on the ground. When he bent down to pick one up, he realized that the book was missing its spine. He picked it up carefully and noticed that it felt heavy. He turned the book over and saw that it had been written in a language similar to ancient Eldritch writing. He flipped through the pages and read.
In the beginning, there was nothing. Then came chaos. Chaos was the first and only being. Chaos created the universe, but it wasn't enough, so chaos split itself into 5 parts. One part of chaos became Archon, a being that can take many forms. Another part of the chaos became Diva, a being that cannot change from one form to another, but can use the powers of the other beings. A third part of chaos became the Obscura, a being that feeds off chaos. The fourth part of chaos became Erebus, a being that had no true form, but is able to alter reality. The last part of chaos became the Gith, a being that could only exist within the walls of the Gith Tower.
What are you doing?
Asked an old man clad in white from behind him. Jacob quickly put the book back on the shelf and turned around to see Professor Ivers standing there with his hands clasped together.
My apologies, Professor. I did not see you there.
You do not look like the type of person who would enjoy reading about the occult. Why do you want to know about the occult?
Honestly, I'm just curious.
What was that book you were reading there?
Jacob didn't want to answer, but he felt like he owed Ivers more than his initial response, so he reluctantly answered.
It was written in a language similar to ancient Eldritch writing. I wanted to translate it.
Can I see it?
Sure.
He took the book from the shelf and handed it to Ivers.
You're lucky you found this here. If you ever decide to translate it, let me know and I'll tell you how to destroy it. Why would you destroy it when you've researched it? Have you any idea how far I've come for this cursed book?
That book isn't the cursed one which you seek.
Professor Ivers turned away and started walking down the aisles of bookshelves. Jacob followed after him, curious as to what book the professor had told him about.
Come with me.
Jacob followed him down the aisle, and they stopped in front of a book covered in strange symbols Jacob was unfamiliar with.
What is this?
Jacob asked while trying to open the cover. Ivers quickly slammed his hand on the cover, stopping Jacob from seeing what's inside.
That's the book I told you about. Don't touch it. If you want to learn about the GTHALL, you must read the books I brought you. The one that contains the secret of the GTHALL.
How do you know it exists?
The book you seek is written in ancient Eldritch language. This book I've given you is written in the same language. It's obvious someone wrote it. That means that someone knows the GTHALL exist and has decided to write about it. The question is, why?
How will I be able to decipher the book you have given me?
Ivers gave him a sinister smile and said,
There's a spell in this book that allows anyone who has read it to understand the language written inside. I think you'll find it quite useful.
Well, thank you for your help. Well, now, if you'll excuse me, I must get going before my family gets worried about me.
Wait, Jacob!
Professor Ivers grabbed Jacob's wrist so tightly, his knuckles went white. There was a look of fear in his eyes, and Jacob knew he had to act quickly or else he wouldn't survive. Professor Ivers removed his hand from Jacob's arm and stared into his eyes. Jacob could see that he was genuinely afraid, but he couldn't figure out why. Before he could ask him anything, Professor Ivers disappeared before his eyes. Jacob had no choice but to run. He sprinted through the hallways and up the stairs to escape the old man. He burst through the doors to the outside wall to find himself in a dark hallway. The hallway was unfamiliar to him, but he ran down it, all the same. It didn't seem to end and only seemed to get darker. He suddenly found himself standing before a proper-looking gentleman wearing a suit.
Who are you?
Jacob was shocked to hear the voice coming out of his mouth. For a moment, he wondered if everything was really happening or if he was going crazy.
Jacob Henderson. I'm sorry if I disturbed you, sir. I'm trying to get home.
Jacob Henderson? Jacob Henderson? Are you the new student we hired? The one who replaced our late friend Stefan?
Yes, sir,
said Jacob, unsure of what to say.
Of course you must be. Since you're standing in front of me, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Henry Manderbrook, but everyone calls me Lord Manderbrook. What's your name, dear boy?
Jacob.
Well, Jacob, I've been looking forward to meeting you. I hope that you are ready for a wild ride.
He extended his hand to shake Jacob's hand, but Jacob pulled back.
Why do you call yourself Lord Manderbrook?
Because I'm your master now, Jacob.
Master? I don't remember signing any contract.
Of course not, Jacob.
I just assumed that since I gave you a book and showed you my private library, that you would join our little club. But I've never even heard of your cult.
I don't blame you for that. We keep ourselves very quiet.
We prefer to remain hidden so that no one will notice us. I'm sorry, sir, but I must go home. It was nice to meet you.
Jacob turned to leave.
Hold there, Jacob. Before you go, let me show you something.
Manderbrook turned around and led Jacob back down the hallway. He stopped in front of a large door and pushed it open. Jacob walked inside and found himself standing in a long, dark room with dozens of torches burning along the walls. As Jacob walked inside, he noticed that the ceiling was impossibly high. After staring for a moment at this oddity, he looked back down to see a room full of hooded figures wearing blindfold, seeming to be one with the shadows. The door closes behind Jacob and the men begin chanting in a rhythmic tone. Jacob could feel energy filling the room and coming from somewhere above him. He tried to lift his arms, but found himself bound to the floor. His mother's amulet began to hum. While the whole world seemed to get a little foggy around him, he seemed to be able to maintain his sanity. Lord Manderbrook leaned over Jacob's head and whispered,
This is what you've always wanted, Jacob.
Well, what am I supposed to be looking at? I can't see anything.
Do you mean the statue on the wall behind you?
Jacob turned to face the wall but still couldn't see anything.
No, there's nothing behind me.
Oh, well, then perhaps it's time you learned a few things about yourself.
Suddenly the light from the torches behind Jacob was extinguished, leaving only the dim glow of the torchlight in front of him. He strained to see through the darkness as he continued to try to lift his arms. Suddenly, he heard voices whispering all around him.
He's awake. Have you tried to check his aura? His aura isn't changing. Are you sure he's really awake? I'm certain.
Maybe it's the amulet. We should take it off.
Jacob feels a hand touch his chest where the amulet rested and heard a sizzle and a scream. The amulet began to glow in a sickly green light that cast a shadow upon the wall.
Stop it! Stop it!
Suddenly, Jacob was able to see again. He saw Manderbrook pulling at his shirt and holding the amulet in his hand. Beside him was a pile of ashen human bones. Manderbrook looked unhappy and pulled out a small dark dagger and held it to Jacob's throat.
What have you done?
I've sent the boy back to the grave where he belongs, and I think it's time we sent you to join him.
Lord Manderbrook, much to Jacob's confusion, took hold of the blade end of the dagger with his other hand and shouted something eldritch as his blood dripped to the ground. The other hooded figures all disappeared around him as something started to rise from the shadows. From the darkness came a huge black beast with red glowing eyes. The creature was the size of a car and stood on its hind legs. It had 2 razor-sharp claws protruding from each foot. 2 red eyes bore into Jacob's soul. Jacob could feel the terror of the thing as it stared at him, waiting for his final moments. With a flick of its claw, the monster swiped Jacob across the side of his body. As he fell to the ground, Jacob felt the same sickening feeling he had felt when he had touched the book. The pain was intense and he found himself screaming until he realized that he wasn't alone anymore. Several others were in the room with him, but they were covered by hoods and masks. One of them spoke.
Where is my son?
Jacob could barely hear the voice over the sounds of the creature.
He's dead, but he has given you a chance to live again.
Jacob clutched his side. There seemed to be a black goo pouring from the wound instead of blood, and his mind began to itch uncontrollably.
So, what is it you want from me? To bring you into our society?
I'm not interested in joining a group of freaks like you.
Realizing he had regained control of his arms after the beast attacked him, Jacob quickly snatched his amulet back from Manderbrook and tried to run away. But instead of fleeing from his attacker, Jacob found himself caught in the grip of something invisible. He could feel something trying to pull him toward the beast, but he fought against it and managed to break free. The amulet was glowing, that same sickly green color, and his brain's itching seemed to waver for a moment. Suddenly, he could see. He looked at Manderbrook and saw that he was no longer wearing his mask.
You aren't the one running around here.
Well, I'm certainly not the child soiling his pants on a mere beast either.
Let me go.
Not until I give you a chance to make things right.
I don't know how to make things right.
That's okay. All you have to do is pick a card.
Jacob looked down at the floor beneath his feet and hesitantly picked up a strained card. He raised it to eye level and stared at it. Before him was a symbol of a circle with 5 lines crossing each other. Jacob looked up at Manderbrook.
Do you know what this means?
Jacob shook his head and placed the card back on the floor.
Then you won't be able to hurt us.
Jacob could feel someone come up behind him. He twisted around and saw a man with an eye patch covering his left eye. The man wore a dark cloak with a hood that covered most of his face. Jacob was unsure if he recognized this person or not, but he believed he did.
This is our friend.
The tall man with the eye patch smiled, but in his mouth there were no teeth or tongue, just a black void.
The GTHALL uses its powers to force a subject to perform certain actions. The GTHALL uses their victims to further its goals.
Jacob could feel the entity trying to get a grip on him once again. He used his own power to resist it, but the more he struggled, the stronger it got. The man with the eye patch seemed to grow and morph into a slimy black creature with many eyes. Its body pulsated as it grew before Jacob's very eyes. Jacob felt its presence crawl up his spine and he screamed as he saw the blackness flowing into him.
Now, Jacob, you must choose a card.
Jacob felt the darkness slip into his mind and begin to take hold of him. He felt as though he was losing his grip on reality, and everything around him started to fade. Just as he was about to succumb to the creature's will, Jacob heard a voice speak.
Jacob. Jacob. Jacob.
It was familiar, and it filled him with an incredible sense of relief. Jacob's eyes snapped open and he immediately reached for his amulet. When he grabbed it, he saw that it had stopped glowing and that the blackness was gone from his mind.
Who are you?
Jacob looked at the person before him and knew instantly that he was seeing his father. The man had short brown hair that was starting to gray and a thick beard. Jacob collapsed to his knees. He thought his father had died 4 years ago at sea.
Hello, son.
Father?
Yes, and I've come to take you home.
I don't understand.
Don't worry about understanding, just trust me.
Jacob looked at the amulet and noticed that it had returned to its normal color. The blackness had disappeared from his mind completely. He also noticed that his father had removed his cloak and his face was revealed. His father had been a fisherman most of his life and had never learned to read or write. Jacob remembered his father telling him that his mother had taught him how to read and write.
I'm sorry. I was such a disappointment to you.
That's not true, Jacob. Your mother and I love you very much. We just couldn't see it.
Jacob began to approach his father, but as he approached, his amulet began to hum and glow again.
Wait!
What is it?
Look at my amulet.
Jacob did as his father instructed and noticed that the symbol on it had changed. Instead of a circle with 5 lines crossing it, he now saw a pentagram with 5 crosses.
What does that mean?
It means you've accepted my offer.
The room seemed to shimmer and quake. Then, as quickly as his father had appeared, he disappeared, and in his place, the mighty GTHALL stood, tentacles reaching for Jacob as his amulet was practically screaming. It was all an illusion to trick Jacob into accepting his destiny.
There is no fate but what we make,
said Jacob, looking back at the statue. He picked up the card and held it in front of him. There was a flash of light and he saw himself standing in front of Manderbrook. The creature was still staring into his eyes as it prepared to strike Jacob down.
Fate is merely the choice of the gods,
Jacob said as he held up the card. The GTHALL recoiled in shock and seemed to melt into the shadows. Jacob turned to Manderbrook. Manderbrook looked confused and angry.
You win nothing but a pawn in my game. No, I helped you because I trusted you. And why would you do that? Because you wanted to save your pathetic little girlfriend? Or are you some kind of hero? I don't care about her. She's just a pawn in my plan. She's nothing compared to you.
Manderbrook laughed.
Oh yes, I forgot. You think you know what you're doing. You think you can just show up and destroy my plans? Well, you're wrong, young man. Your friends have already failed you. I made sure of that.
Jacob knew that Manderbrook was lying. He looked at Manderbrook with disgust and anger as he raised the card high over his head.
You think this is going to work?
Jacob turned to look at him and smiled.
You have no idea who you're dealing with.
Jacob's amulet continued to pulse and glow.
I believe in the heart of the cards.
Jacob shouted as he threw the card as hard as he could. It struck Manderbrook square in the chest and exploded like a grenade.
The GTHALL's abilities are limited to manipulating one's mind through the use of magic. The GTHALL's abilities are weakened in direct sunlight.
Jacob was almost knocked off his feet as the blast rocked him backward. He was thrown several yards away from the explosion and he hit the ground hard. At first, he thought he might be dead, but a quick glance up showed that the stone building remained intact. He rolled over onto his hands and knees, gasping for air, and he tried to stand up. When he finally rose to his feet, he saw that his amulet was still glowing brightly. He walked over to the spot where the GTHALL had been standing and tried to search the area for the monster, but found nothing. An image of the room being filled with tentacles and blood flickered for a moment, but the room was still empty. Jacob staggered back against the wall, shocked by what he saw. but the room was peaceful. Jacob felt that itch in his brain again and noticed his hands opening the book Professor Ivers gave him. He tried to stop them, but his hands were acting on their own. As the pages opened, Jacob saw images of the ancient symbols etched into the walls. He saw the same symbol on the card that he had thrown. Jacob closed the book and he could feel his mind clearing for a brief second. He blinked and saw the cult room again. Manderbrook kneeling before the giant abomination, then blinked again and it was gone. Now Stella Manderbrook stood before Jacob in the empty stone room.
You don't have long, Jacob.
Stella said as she walked towards him.
I need you to help me.
Why should I believe you?
Because if you don't, you'll die.
What do you want me to do?
Read the book.
Stella said, grabbing the book's covers and holding it open while patting Jacob on the head and running her fingers through his hair.
Don't worry, I won't hurt you.
Jacob looked at the book and he could feel his mind becoming more clear. He could see the words clearly now and he began to read. The book was written in a language that Jacob didn't understand at all, but he didn't let that stop him. He kept reading and when he finished, he looked up at Stella and smiled.
Thank you
What?
Stella asked.
for helping me.
I should be thanking you, Jacob.
Stella smiled and leaned down to kiss his forehead. Jacob's amulet screamed and clicked before finally shattering with a flash of pale green. All went black.
GTHALL molds the minds like clay. GTHALL controls others to do its bidding. GTHALL has been seen.
Sniff my stinky pinky, Yenny Finky. Ooh.